Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, dwyersportsbetting.com. I've been tied up Memorial Day with my family, the weekend, as well as work. Got hit with a bunch of court filings and stuff like that. Let me just say before I start, before I even get into my intro, given that Memorial Day weekend just passed, a very heartfelt thanks and appreciation from me to every man and woman serving in the United States military. Just know that some of us are very, very grateful. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Let's talk about Errol Spence, and he delivered. Got the win. In fact, he got the KO. Right? Let's talk about Errol Spence's win over Kell Brook. Now, parts of the fight surprised me. Right? Every fight is a learning experience. You go in with a set of thoughts, you see some of the action, and then you say, wow, this is a little bit different than what I expected. Now, the fight was in Kell Brook's backyard of Sheffield, right, England, and let's just say, I was a little bit astonished by the first half of the fight. One of the things that I believe to be true, and that I'm going to rely on in handicapping future matches, is that Kell Brook, on his A game, when he is fully rested, in other words, it's the start of the fight, there's no fatigue issue, you're 100%. Right? When Kell Brook is fully rested, his A game is better than Errol Spence's A game. Right? I know Kell Brook is older, but dare I say, Kell Brook, when he's at his best, is the better athlete. Right? Out the gate, I thought Kell Brook avoided the mistake that Liam Walsh made against Gervonta Davis. Right? You have a younger opponent crossing the Atlantic, facing you in your backyard. The crowd is going crazy. The fighters have just been announced. The expectation is at fever pitch. The fight starts. You've got to remind the visitor that he is a visitor. You can't allow the guy to suddenly feel at home, take off his shoes, use the bathroom, ask for the TV remote, start changing the channel. You can't allow any of that. You have to have the guy feeling uncomfortable. You have to have the guy feeling like he's fighting in your country. Now, Liam Walsh didn't do that against Gervonta Davis. Kell Brook does. He starts the fight in tremendous fashion. Out the gate, I thought Kell Brook was just faster. In fact, he was much faster than I expected relative to Errol Spence. Right? Kell Brook is the guy with the faster hand speed. I thought Kell Brook's counter jab, right? And keep in mind, Spence is a southpaw. I thought Kell Brook's counter jab, right? He's throwing a left jab, was landing with regularity. He seemed to be able to time Errol Spence's shots, dodge the shot, and throw a jab, and it was landing. Not only that, Kell Brook then picks it up and steps on his front foot and is right in front of Errol Spence. And I didn't think Spence could do much about it. At times, it felt like I was watching, dare I say, Floyd Mayweather against Canelo. One guy was just faster than the other guy. One guy just seemed to be able to move around the ring more. One guy had better reflexes, right? It's not just proactive speed of throwing shots. It's actually the ability to read and react more quickly. Right? Kell Brook just seemed to be operating at a different speed to me than Errol Spence. But you noticed Errol Spence didn't show up to be a spectator. You notice that even as Kell Brook tries to jump on him, even as the crowd is at fever pitch, even given the fact that Errol Spence is the younger guy, Errol Spence is the challenger, he's not the champion, right? Given all the boxing royalty that's there in the building, right? Carl Froch, Johnny Nelson, Amir Khan, Tony Bellew, right? The guy had to feel that he was on foreign soil. But Errol Spence is bringing the fight to Kell Brook as Kell Brook is bringing the fight to him. Now that's one of the first problems with the fight, right? The real story here is the backstory. At the 6th round mark, and keep in mind, I picked Errol Spence. It's easier for me to come on here after a fight and say, hey, this fighter delivered. We won, right? Take your kid to a movie, right? Tip your waitress. It's easier for me to do that than to show up and say, oh, I have egg on my face and stuff. So I'm hoping Errol Spence delivers. Plus, I have money on the fight, right? So I'm hoping Errol Spence delivers. At the end of 6 rounds, I had Kell Brook winning the fight 4 rounds to 2. But you noticed, right? You started to notice around round 4 or 5 that Kell Brook was slowing down, right? And that's the problem with the fight from the Kell Brook side. The backstory finished Kell Brook, right? Kell Brook just doesn't have the ability at 147 pounds anymore to fight at his A game over 12 rounds. In other words, Kell Brook is Kell Brook at the beginning of the fight, right? The problem is, just like when you're playing a video game and you notice that the video character's stamina is dropping, right? Some of these games actually have a stamina bar. Kell Brook's stamina started to drop, where you noticed that his quickness, his reaction time, his hand speed advantage started to slow down, right? Kell Brook should never have fought this fight at 147. You knew that in the post-fight interview with Eddie Hearn, right? His promoter, where Eddie himself said, look, I told Kell Brook he should be fighting at 154. Kell Brook should never have taken this fight, right? To the hardcore gamblers, let me say, it's not like Kell Brook picked Errol Spence, right? This is always something to look out for. Errol Spence was the mandatory contender. So this wasn't the fight Kell Brook wanted. This was the fight Kell Brook had to have to keep his title, right? So here he is against the wrong opponent, a 147-pounder who shows up on British soil and is not a wallflower. He's not giving Kell Brook time to think, right? I'm sure Errol Spence in the first round is looking at Kell Brook's punches and is saying, damn, this guy is fast, right? I'm sure he felt some of Kell Brook's punches. Kell Brook is an underrated puncher. And he thought, man, this guy hits hard, right? But understand the mindset. Errol Spence is a hunter. He's not giving you time to think. And understand the problem Kell Brook had. I said it in the pre-fight video. He just suffered in his last fight his first professional loss against another hunter, Golovkin, right? And you mean to tell me that his comeback fight, his return fight, is against another hunter who is not going to give him time to pace himself, who's going to be up on him and who's going to be just convinced that he can land body shots on Kell Brook, right? Errol Spence is hunting Kell Brook, who is just coming off not just his first professional loss, but a loss that involved a devastating injury, right? A fractured eye socket. Now, Kell Brook, in interviews, admitted that the doctors told him that had the fight continued, the Golovkin fight, and had he been hit in the eye again, he could have lost his vision. Now, I'm telling you, boxers bleed blood just like the rest of us, right? If we fall down a flight of stairs, or if they fall down a flight of stairs, there's going to be pain. They feel pain just like the rest of us. Now, I know all of us look at these interviews and these boxers are portraying themselves as bulletproof, as unafraid. You know, last fight, when I fractured my eye socket, who cares? Bring on Errol Spence. The fact that he's unbeaten, the fact that he has a huge punch. Hey, I just fought the middleweight champion. Why won't I fight the #1 contender for my belt at 147, even though I'm going to have to drop 2 weight classes to fight him? So Kell Brook could have escaped this match. On my scorecard, I had him up 4-2 after 6. In other words, in front of a very passionate Kell Brook crowd in Sheffield. Right? I think we all know Kell Brook had more fans in that crowd than Errol Spence. All Kell Brook had to do over the last 6 rounds was not fall down and win 2 of the 6 to keep his title. A tie goes to the champion. You and I know too that if the fight were razor close and then the judges took the belt from the champion, and even that would be a little bit of a reach, right? Because the fight's in the championship's backyard, right? There'd be an outcry. People would say, look, Spence, we know you're unbeaten. We don't want to hear you talking about Keith Thurman because you have unfinished business with Kell Brook. So understand, at the halfway point of the fight, I had Kell Brook up 2 rounds. The big question in the fight was whether Kell Brook was going to get a second wind, like Anthony Joshua, who was also dead in the water halfway through the fight, got against Vladimir Klitschko. Kell Brook didn't get the second wind because he's fighting in the wrong weight class, right? Understand, Kell Brook looked great, right? Kell Brook talked big. People keeping track would say, well, Kell Brook has been champ at 147. What could possibly go wrong? Folks, fighting Errol Spence is like being in a sauna, right? He's the guy who follows you from room to room in your own house. This is even as you're beating him. So Kell Brook wilts the second half of the fight. You're watching the fight, you're saying, man, Kell has slowed down tremendously. Right? You see Errol Spence, hungry fighter. Right? First shot at a title. Errol Spence is not a bystander. He's not going to let anything go. So Errol Spence, who admitted after the fight that he felt he was behind, right? Even Errol Spence knew he was behind. Errol Spence continues to bring it. He's not discouraged. Right, he continues to bring it. And you know the rest. He forces Kell Brook to fight every second of every round. And Kell Brook may have looked in shape. Kell Brook may have made weight at the weigh-in. Kell Brook was not in shape to go 12 rounds at an Errol Spence pace at 147 pounds. Let me also say this, right? Spence starts throwing shots that puff up Kell Brook's face. It's a bad visual. Now, I mentioned this in the pre-fight video, right? Kell Brook is coming off of a traumatic experience against Golovkin, right? I mentioned it. Now, you know the way it is. You're fresh off eye surgery for a fractured eye socket. I'm sure Kell Brook looked tough when the doctor told him, man, had you gotten hit on this eye again, you could have lost your vision, right? I'm sure Kell Brook had the testosterone going and was like, yeah, hey, man, come on, I'm Kell Brook. You know, I'm still the champ at 147, right? I'm sure Kell Brook reacted better than my daughter is here in the background in the next room, if you can hear her, right? Well, let me just say this. He's in against Errol Spence. He gets hit in the other eye. You can imagine. I know Kell Brook has the poker face. This is what boxers do, right? They get hit with big shots and they're looking calm, right? You would think the guy's drinking a soda or something, right? No. Kell Brook had to be thinking, my vision is blurry. Right? Now keep in mind, blurry vision or not, the shots he's getting hit with by Errol Spence are hard shots. Understand too, Spence has put in the work with body shots. Right? He's put in the work with body shots to wilt even a guy who's in shape. Now here he is fighting a guy who's not in shape. I don't care how Kell Brook looked. The fast reflexes I talked about that Kell Brook had at the start of the fight, the great movement, that's gone. That's gone by like the 9th round. That's gone. So Kell Brook gets hit. You notice his face starts to puff up. Kell Brook, I'm sure today knows he made the right decision to take a knee. He gets knocked down, fight continues, he takes a knee, right? He really retires. I know the ref's talking to him and stuff like that. Keep in mind, you can end a fight, if you're a fighter, without saying, that's it for me, by just looking just looking dejected at the ref, right? Ref's like, you want to continue? You're like, you know. So Kell Brook wanted out. After the fight, we find out he has a fractured eye socket in the other eye. Right? The other eye. Now, let me just say this, and I know it's going to be controversial. Right? You've heard me give you my opinion that boxing is a young man's sport. Right? Except in the heavyweight division. I'll give the heavyweight division a carve out. But boxing really is a young man's sport. It's also, dare I say, a working man's sport. Right? Wealthy guys really don't go into boxing. Right? Some boxers are wealthy. I'm telling you, if you investigate their backgrounds, you're going to find out that they started from humble beginnings. Right? Manny Pacquiao might be wealthy today. Manny Pacquiao at one point in life was a young working class guy trying to get by, looked at boxing as a way to possibly get wealthy. Right? Now you and I know the wealthy, if they're wealthy at the beginning of their careers, just saying it sounds ridiculous, right? But if they're wealthy at the beginning of their careers and they go through a fight where they get a fractured eye socket, they have to have a plate put in their head. Think about it. A plate put in their head around the eye socket as part of a surgical procedure. And then they go back out there and in the next fight get a fractured eye socket in the next eye after hearing from a doctor that they're lucky they didn't lose their vision in the last fight. I'm telling you, if you're wealthy, if you're Warren Buffett's kid, and you're into boxing for love of the sport, and you start hearing things that about your vision being at risk, you're going to get out of the sport. Right? Now, Kell Brook, God bless him, has made a lot of money. Right? Unbeaten champ for a long time. Just his last 2 fights should have filled the bank account, right? Middleweight challenge, big fight at home against Errol Spence, the #1 contender, right? I know Kell Brook. I saw the first half of the fight. I saw the first third of the fight. I know Kell Brook still has world-class skills, right? The hand speed was magnificent. He moved better than Errol Spence, right? If Errol Spence didn't have the defense he has, and there's a moment early in the fight that turns the fight style-wise. Kell Brook gets up on Errol Spence, who's surprised. Some sluggers whose whole goal in life is offense would just try to slug it out with Kell Brook, right? Had Errol Spence done that, he would have lost. Probably would have been stopped. But you'll notice on the film, you might recall this, Errol Spence puts up both hands, right? This is the heavy puncher. This is the offensive juggernaut, the guy with a high KO percentage, actually showing you some defensive skills. He actually goes full-blown rabbit ears, right? Puts up his hands and has Kell Brook hit his hands, right? That's what saved him. Because had he tried to trade with Kell Brook, his punches are longer than Kell Brook's. Kell Brook was landing the left hand. If Kell Brook against a southpaw had just been able to come right down Main Street with the right hand, if he had convinced Errol Spence to open up at that point, keep in mind, Kell Brook's already winning most of the early rounds, he might have stopped Spence. But Spence is the skilled hunter. Right? Spence is the guy who's hunting you. Then when you start to fire back, he has protection. Right? Let me just add too, for future opponents who saw that, because there's a downside to Spence's defense. If a guy turtles, if he doesn't have an active defense where he can throw punches while he's blocking your shots, right? A fighter, and I'm sure Kell Brook is thinking this looking at the replay of the fight, a fighter could literally, when you turtle, jump to the side and wait for you to open up a bit. Right? An example of what I'm talking about is Roy Jones turtling against Danny Green. And Danny Green hangs around, right? In other words, the guy turtles. If he's like this and not throwing punches back at you, you don't have to worry about his offense at that point, right? Also, Spence likes to be on his front foot. He likes to be moving forward when he's throwing punches. You have Spence on his back foot turtling. I'm surprised Kell Brook didn't bounce to the side. Manny Pacquiao does this, right? Bounce to the side and try to hit him on the side of his head. Or wing shots, Danny Green against Roy Jones, wing shots wide that could get around the turtle defense. Well, anyway, the moment passed. Spence's defense helped him tremendously in the first half of the fight. He's still fully conscious. He's still aggressive in the second half of the fight. Kell Brook falls apart. Kell Brook then starts having, in my opinion, and I have no proof of this because I'm not a mind reader, but I believe he then starts having flashbacks to Golovkin. And my point to Kell Brook is, look, if you have family around you, if the sport of boxing has feted you with wealth, you still have your health, right? Your community knows that you proudly brought this event to them, right? You're a community hero. Sheffield's the kind of place where Naseem Hamed hops in the ring before the fight and the crowd goes crazy. Crowd cheers him, right? Sheffield remembers its fighters. All I'm saying is, look, think hard before you continue your career, right? Just think hard. From a health perspective, right? You're already luckier than a lot of guys who've had injuries to their eyes, right? No one talks about Calvin Brock. You remember him. He fought Vladimir Klitschko for the heavyweight title. Calvin Brock has vision problems. No one talks about Layman Brewster. You remember him. He was heavyweight champion. He actually beat Klitschko the first time, right? Think about it. He has eye problems, right? These weren't the kind of problems that would allow these guys to continue their careers. Understand, I've just named two guys with major eye problems who fought the same opponent. That's how prevalent injury is in the sport of boxing. Right? I want Kell Brook to look around. I also want Kell Brook to look at older fighters who were great fighters, who are no longer able to be in the public arena. Right? Wilfred Benitez. I'm telling you, he was a great fighter. Many people expected him to beat Sugar Ray Leonard. Right? He's someone who, because of injuries suffered in the ring, is no longer in the public arena. Right? I know many of you are going to say, come on now, he's in his early 30s. Right? Well, he's in his early 30s and he's going to have to campaign in a different division that has other guys, right, who are dangerous, who are going to view him as a smaller guy moving up into their neighborhood. Right? Also, let's just think it through. He takes a knee. Right? I got the feeling he gets hit in the eye. The eye's in bad shape. I know he's a boxer, so, you know, like hockey players, you know, a limb could be hanging off, and the guy's going to tell you, oh, it's not that bad. You know, yeah, I'm okay, right? Bottom line is, Kell Brook gives up his title because he's hit in the eye and can't see out of it, and then we find out that it's a fractured eye socket. Right? In my opinion, if I'm Kell Brook here, given the dangers of the sport, given the fact that men like Muhammad Ali couldn't even serve as a boxing commentator later in his career, right? Because, in my opinion, and I'm not a doctor, of injuries suffered in the ring. Right? Given that big-time trainers, guys who know the sport well, Nacho Beristain, eye injury. Joel Diaz, eye injury. If I'm Kell Brook and if I can still see well enough to drive, and if I'm looking in my bank account and I see 7 figures, right? And I'm looking at my wife, I'm looking at my house, I'm looking at my children, I'm looking at my friends, I'm well respected in the community, then boxing has delivered for me. Right? It's time for me to leave the stage. No one's going to accuse him of being a coward when the guy has had 2 fractured eye sockets. Keep in mind too, even if he makes a full physical recovery, right? How do you know how he's going to react the next time he's hit in the eye at a heavier weight by a puncher? Let's say he decides, you know what, I'm going to go back to 160. I'm going to go, you know, get the title there. Folks, that necessarily means he would have to fight the winner of Golovkin-Canelo, right? If he's going to stick around 160, he'd have to fight Danny Jacobs. These guys can punch. Who wants to get hit in the eye by one of those guys? So know when to say when. To sum up, I thought, personally, Kell Brook looked like the better fighter. Certainly the first third of the fight. By the halfway point, he started to run out of gas. We knew that he shouldn't have been fighting at 147. We knew this fight was too soon after the Golovkin fight. It showed. Right? Spence is still on his front foot. The body shots that Kell Brook took, and trust me, they were hellacious. Errol Spence continues to dole them out. You look at Kell Brook's face. You didn't even have to know about the fractured eye socket. His eye was all puffed up. As it was, his face was swollen. And you knew that Errol Spence was not letting up. Right? Even when it's obvious that Kell Brook is completely struggling, Errol Spence took nothing for granted. right? His personality type is not the kind that says, you know what, I'm going to trust the judges here on British soil. No, no. He knew he had lost the first half of the fight. He needed to close big. He did. And now he's the champ at 147. Let me say this too about Errol Spence. I'm not sure if he beats Keith Thurman. But just know, Keith Thurman just had surgery on his elbow. Also understand, Keith Thurman has a lot of social capital with boxing fans, right? We know the guys who are fighting real opponents. So Keith Thurman fought Sean Porter. Keith Thurman fought unbeaten Danny Garcia. Right? So understand, Keith Thurman, in my opinion, has some cover to say, look, I'm fresh out of surgery. Let me fight someone other than Errol Spence in my first fight back. Let me also point out, too, that Spence, who wants to be great, has a certain urgency about him. Right? Because I believe Spence himself knows that it takes a lot for him to make weight at 147. Now, many of you pointed out to me that Errol Spence is even younger than I thought. I thought he was 28. He's actually 27. Right? Let's just say Errol Spence fighting at 147, especially with no fights at 160. Right? At 27, had more stamina and had an easier time making weight than Kell Brook in his 30s did after fighting at 160. But let me caution the Errol Spence crowd here, and he is great. There's no question about it. He is great. But let me caution that crowd. As great as Spence is, there are different levels of athleticism, even among world-class athletes. I didn't think Spence was the athlete Kell Brook was when everyone was rested here. I think a Manny Pacquiao, and I know Pacquiao's well into his 30s, right? I know it. Trust me. I've covered Pacquiao here online for a while now. But I think a Manny Pacquiao would have more hand speed and more athleticism than Spence. And understand, a guy like Pacquiao who moves around the ring, darts around the ring, and who bends more at the waist, would be harder to catch in the body. And body punching is a key part of Errol Spence's game. Right? So, just understand, Spence to me is a bit like Terence Crawford. Spence is a craftsman. I consider Crawford to be an elite craftsman as well. Right? Spence is a craftsman. But I don't believe Spence has the hand speed or the reflexes or the athleticism, nor do I believe Crawford does, of a Manny Pacquiao. Now I know boxing's balkanized, right? Spence is an Al Heyman fighter. Manny Pacquiao is a Bob Arum fighter, right? Arum also promotes Terence Crawford. Politically, it's easier to make a Pacquiao-Crawford match than it is to make a Pacquiao-Spence match. But I have to tell you, if a Pacquiao-Spence match were announced, as much as I like Errol Spence, right? I picked him over Kell Brook. I would have to look at the odds and make a hard decision. I am expecting Pacquiao to beat Jeff Horn. Maybe I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself with this video. But if Manny Pacquiao is an underdog against Errol Spence, and let's face it, that's the world we live in these days, right? These young hotshots are getting great odds, right? They're being named favorites, right? Anthony Joshua, favorite over Vladimir Klitschko. If Errol Spence is a favorite over Manny Pacquiao, I'd have to take Pacquiao just as an odds play, because I personally think Pacquiao would have an excellent chance, right? Better than 55% chance of beating Errol Spence. I think Spence needs a guy who just isn't in shape to stand in front of him for 12 rounds. Right? If this were Kell Brook of 5 years ago, Spence probably doesn't win this fight. Right? This is Kell Brook of 2017. Right? He fought one fight at 147 too many. That's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section to this video. Thanks for stopping by.